or community leaders that would like to be recognized before we start? Okay. All right, so I think with that, we want this to be more of a dialogue and exchange. So where's Ken? Right here. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to Ken and start the presentation, Keisha. Okay, all right, thank you.
Hello? There we go. Okay. Again, my name is Ken Taylor, and I'm a director in our land and waste program, which is overseeing a lot of the environmental investigations and cleanup work that's going on at the site. We're going to give you tonight a There we go. What I plan to do tonight is to give you an overview of the site, kind of where it sits in the Congaree River Valley and amongst your community, a little bit of the site history from an environmental release standpoint, because it is quite a long one, and where we are with the current investigations that's being conducted under what we call our consent agreement. I apologize. There we go. A little bit about the site. What does Westinghouse do? I think many of you have known it's been there for years. Began operations in 1969. It sits on over 1,100 acres between Bluff Road and the Congaree River. It's a 550,000 square foot building and operation, and what they do is they manufacture nuclear fuel rods for nuclear power plants. They actually make the little pellets, stack the pellets in the tubes, put the tubes in the bundles, and that goes out to nuclear power plants around the nation. It's one of only 3 of facilities like this in the country that makes nuclear fuel rods. It is not a power plant in itself. They do not generate power here. They buy like we do from Dominion. What I'd like to first do is just kind of give a broad overview of where the site sits amongst your community and within the river valley, a little bit about some geology. I'm a geologist. I'm not an engineer. I'm not I'm a geologist. Sorry. This is an overview of the site. This is Bluff Road. This is the Congaree River. And in outline, it's hard to see it, but that is the actual property lines of the facility. The facility itself sits right in this portion here. The entrance that you pass by Bluff Road is right there. What I want to give a sense is the town of Hopkins is here. This is a distance of almost 4 miles between the facility and the river. A little bit more up close, I want you to take notice that the Congaree River itself is a very kind of winding river, and the valley of the Congaree actually extends from here all the way over to here. This feature is an important one to get used to and understand in tonight's presentation. This is Mill Creek, and it comes in from up in here and works its way down, goes right past the plant, and works its way eventually out to the Congaree River right here. This is a very important feature as far as the groundwater and the surface water geology out of the site. Moving on, David Shelley, I don't know if he's here, he's the park ranger for the Congaree National Park, is also a geologist, and this is some of his work. He worked with some other folks. This is actually the entire portion of the Congaree from near Columbia all the way down to where it meets the Wateree. The plant itself is actually located right about here, and this is Mill Creek and its wanderings. And I say wanderings because the history of this river has wandered back and forth across the valley over the millennium. There are other creeks that come in and do the same, but it's a very dynamic river system that over time works its way back and forth across this river valley, and the site actually sits within it, and that's important from the way groundwater flows. Moving in closer, Mill Creek comes right by the facility here. It's actually dammed one small spot here, and they call this Upper Sunset Lake, and there's another small dam below it. This is Lower Sunset Lake, and then it continues on. The site itself is here. These little colored areas, these are some of the wastewater lagoons, and early on they were creating some problems with groundwater starting back in the 80s. Groundwater flow is from the plant site right to this creek. So there's no flow from the site heading backwards. I'll show you some other things. The plant sits up on a little bit higher ground. The Mill Creek itself is about 15 to 20 feet below the ground surface up here at the site. So the groundwater that's shallow under here wants to get to a low point, and in this case it's Mill Creek. This is also from David Shelley's work and some others. This is a cross section with Hopkins over here across the through the river valley. This is the actual Congaree River cutting in here. But you can see these little steps in the blue. This blue down here is not water, that's a clay in, it's an old one. But over the history of the moving of the creek, of the river, it keeps cutting these what they call terraces. And the plant site itself sits on a terrace just like this with Mill Creek cutting it right at the base of that. So this is ground surface here. A little closer up, imagine this is the plant facility itself. The shallow groundwater is confined in the sand layer. The creek is here. Below it is a fairly thick clay, and none of the groundwater here can get down through. It just wants to get into where the low place is, and that's Mill Creek. And how do we know that? This is actually a cross-section from the site from wells conducting a study back in 1982, I believe. So I'll get into the history a bit, but this is flipped around. So now the lower part's over here, and you're working back towards Bluff Road on this side. The plant will be here. What this shows are what we call groundwater monitoring wells, and they're drilled through, and there's a screen zone near the bottom. This is a bracket. This is 20 foot deep, that's a 30 foot deep. And the blue line here represents where the water table sits around that well. It comes in the bottom and fills up to where its natural height is. And by measuring the heights of these wells, it goes from high elevation to low. In fact, it goes right towards the lower Sunset Lake or upper Sunset Lake. And this is they call it Bluff Road for a reason. There's a lot of these bluffs where these terraces end and the rivers cut other places. So this is the sharp drop off between where the plant sits up in here down into the Mill Creek. Again, groundwater flow direction, high to low. This is a close-up now of all the wells that are at the site in blue, and we'll be getting some more. So the green wells are new wells that are being put in today. The site, the blue lines here represent higher level, lower levels of groundwater, and it means it's moved from high to low. So all the wells, when you compile all this data, have a consistent picture showing the groundwater is moving from the plant site towards Mill Creek, which is now right here. This feature right here, I'm going to make a point, this pond is actually called the Gator Pond, and it sits about 10, 15 feet above in elevation here, so it's actually much higher up. Just a quick briefing on the regulatory roles here. We have two, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or NRC, and we have representatives of them here tonight. They license and regulate the radiological materials at the site, the operations, the safety, emergencies. They also do inspections many more times than once a year. But they oversee really the direct radiological components and activities at the site. The DHEC role is a little different. My group is working with assuring that any releases to the environment, to the soils, to groundwater, surface water, are investigated properly and if needed, cleaned up. We also are involved with the issue of air and water discharge permits. So quick briefing on the history. Back in the 1980s was the first big investigation because there was a fish kill in that gator pond. They didn't know why it was, but it was right below some of the wastewater lagoons. They put in a bunch of monitoring wells. I think it was over 35 at the time. It was 1982. And they basically determined there was high levels of fluorides and nitrates that were getting in that pond. It was seeps and springs getting in the pond that created the fish kill. That groundwater monitoring program has continued since the early 80s to the present day. So there's a vast amount of data from those initial 35 wells. A second phase was in 1995. They discovered a solvent chemical releasing groundwater in some of the wells, and the sources for this were a little bit different. So the places where it started and going to is a little bit different from the ones that are related to the lagoons. So there was another investigation done at that time in 1996. They actually installed a groundwater treatment system that ran until 2011, and it reduced a lot of the contamination of the solvents, but it didn't get all of it, and eventually it became ineffective, and they turned it off in 2011. These are some of the contaminants we know to be present in groundwater. The nitrates I mentioned before, and fluoride, ammonia, the solvents, this is your typical dry cleaning fluid, PCE, trichloroethylene, and two radiologic components we have seen is technetium-99 and uranium. And uranium's been very, very rarely seen. It's only in a few wells. Technetium is a little bit faster moving, and it's a little bit more problematic where it's coming from. That's part of our new investigation, as we'll talk about later. As a scope of the extent of contamination in groundwater that we know of, this is nitrates in groundwater in the yellow. And pretty much where you see it also is the same areas where the fluoride is, where the uranium, a little bit of uranium is, technetium-99 is within but this kind of gives you a scope of where the contamination, other than the solvents, is located. And again, it's moving from the lagoons down to Lower Sunset Lake. As also part of the monitoring system, Westinghouse has always been sampling the water in the creek coming in, the water at the creek here, the water down below the dam, and then farther off downstream, they've been sampling the surface water as well, and we've not seen any problems there. This is the the solvent plume, and it's a little bit more spread out here and over to this side, mainly because there were probably different areas that acted as sources compared to the lagoons, which are right in here. That is also part of this expanded investigation we're entered into. One of the main things we want to talk about tonight is this consent agreement that DHEC and Westinghouse have entered into. What it does is it was signed in February of this year, and it sets up a bunch of things. One is a communication protocol between DHEC and Westinghouse to let us know if something happens, if there's been a spill outside or release early on, and how we're going to proceed forward. It also, it integrates all the investigations of the past releases as well as any current, and if any come in the future, how we deal with them in the future. So it sets up sort of a roadmap of how we collectively will look at each and all of them and have an agreed point to move forward to get through it from investigation all the way to cleanup if necessary. We have not had that in place before. And it takes you all the way through a remedy build and construct and operate. Why do we need to do this? Well, to be honest, we needed a coordinated way to deal with these individual releases. We've had little things happen here and happen there, and it was sort of, it wasn't very coordinated in how it was handled by DHEC and how it was communicated, and there was not an overall arching agreement how to work with them. So that's a very powerful thing that we've gotten in this consent agreement. And for example, I think a lot of you know about a year ago there was the issue with the hydrofluoric acid spiking station leak, and a lot of us got together down over in Hopkins following that. I'll talk about it a little bit later. And then in early 2018, we also learned about an old water leak, a wastewater leak that hadn't really been known before by the department. So you had these little things popping up, and we had no formal process in place to investigate and resolve these issues. Thus, we had decided to enter into the consent agreement. So it's in place, it's providing a comprehensive and consistent process to deal with all current and future releases to the environment. Currently, under that consent agreement, a work plan has been approved to move forward with the next phase of investigation, and that's what this is about. Right now, it was approved back in June. They're in the process, Westinghouse is, of installing up to 29 new groundwater monitoring wells. They're testing soil in about 56 places. We're doing a lot more surface water sampling and also sediment samples in some of the drainage ditches as well as the lakes. And we're resampling all the groundwater wells on the site. The work plan identifies what we call different areas to include in the future investigations, and these are these separate, what we call operable units, but the chemical area, the mechanical area, the lagoons on this side, these lagoons, the southern storage area, and basically the ditch systems as well. They're all part of what's going to be investigated more thoroughly. These are the new wells being proposed. You can see there's a bunch more down in this area, which hadn't really had enough wells in there, so we're looking at this way. Sometimes you see 2 or 3 wells together. That just means you got a shallow one and a deeper one, because sometimes the contaminants will go a little bit deeper and you don't see it in the shallow, you want to go a little bit lower. Again, it's still within that upper, what we call water table aquifer. There's a shallow part and a deeper part. It's all above that clay, and all of it's headed to here. And there's a few more wells going on the other side just to make sure there's nothing getting past Mill Creek. This shows all the wells, both present and what will be there once this next phase is done. And it could be another phase beyond that. It depends what we find in this first one. Again, last year, I think many of us were aware of the spiking station incident. We had the meeting. We also did some private well sampling, and then most recently it was the sealant container issue. So for as far as the spiking station, they identified it was inside the chemical part of the plant. They identified small areas, 12 by 16 feet, where the acid had eaten through the protective floor and got underneath the floor itself. And so they excavated down to 12 feet, and it's now been filled back with concrete. There was no evidence that groundwater below was affected. It's down about 16 feet. That work is now completed, and just for an example, that location is in the building in here. This is the spiking station footprint. That's the 12 by 16, and these are the sampling points they did from shallow all the way down to find all the levels wherever they could find anything to identify it. This is an actual picture of that spiking station before they filled it in and after it was excavated. So this again is about 12 feet. That's the exterior of the wall of the building. And behind here is, there's 2 spiking stations. After they get this one back in operation, they're going to do the same here as there as they did here, and remove all that and redo the floor and strengthen anything so there won't be another problem like we had here. We also did a private well sampling last summer. DHEC sampled 14 private wells for a bunch of different things, including radiologic, RADs we call them, and organic solvents, and MACT. Richland County also did their own effort. We understand they got about 62 private wells as well. Those were just looking for uranium, but in all this work, not any of those wells detected anything that was known to be a contaminant at Westinghouse. Okay? Every one of these things came back non-detect for anything that's associated with Westinghouse. And this is a map of where the spread was, these wells, and we had some all the way up in here. The site is here. The plant is actually right in this part of that portion. And the green is the Richland County sampling points, and the yellows are the ones DHEC. The most recent thing was the end of May this year. We got word pretty quickly from Westinghouse that they have these sealant containers that are between the wastewater lagoons, and there's that gator pond, that store material that have recoverable uranium in it. They want to reprocess it, get the uranium out. Typically, each of these sealants are filled with drums on pallets that have like mop heads and rags and other things that have come in contact with uranium-bearing fluids, and they were being stored here waiting to be processed in the plant. When they investigated, they found one of these had a hole in the roof, and when they opened it up, they noticed that rainwater got in, and some of the drums inside looked in bad shape. And that started a whole campaign where all the other sealands, all these were opened, inspected, and they're in the process now of emptying each one of them and getting the material out. And I'll let Westinghouse speak to it later, but my understanding is they're in the business now of getting these things gone. Okay, some have been there since early 2000s. But under the consent agreement, we do have a plan for each one of these as they remove it, physically move the container, the truck container away. We have sampling going on under the ground underneath it just to verify nothing's gotten out of this. And that's ongoing. So that is as brief as I can be. I hope that gives you a little bit of perspective of how the site sits, where we know contamination is, where it's going, why it's going there, and what we're now engaged with Westinghouse in order to really more clearly refine that picture and make sure all the edges are clearly identified. And from that, move forward to make any decisions about what needs to be cleaned up now, waiting to a decommission period of 4 years. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Keisha, and she's going to organize the remainder.
Yes. Would you like to, I'm sorry, the sun is in my eyes. Would you like to speak or say anything?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, thank you for coming. Are there any other elected officials? All right. Christy and Donna are going to help us with question and answers. So please raise your hand and we will come to you with the microphone so everyone can hear you.
As Myra stated when we started tonight, this is about being able to have that time for discussion and connect with the community, hear your questions, try to have those conversations. And so that's a really important part of our agenda tonight. So I really appreciate everyone being here. Lower Richland High School was a gracious host for us. We really appreciate Richland 1 letting us use this facility. It is a spot where we really do need some microphones to help us in this large space. So what we're going to do, this is Donna Moy, and I'm Christy Ellenberg. We're part of the community engagement team of DHEC Environmental Affairs. And what we're going to be doing is, if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand. Donna and I will come to you, and that way it'll make it a little more convenient for you. We'll make sure that we're capturing those questions and being able to hear everyone who wants to share something tonight. And I see some hands already going up. And let's just make sure that we may, if we see a lot of hands kind of stacked, some people tell you who we're coming to next. So please just be patient with us. I'll hand here, and we're going to come here, and we'll see where comment is.
I just wanted to find out some more information on what is the water lagoons. You said that they are there, but what sort of material goes into those lagoons, and how are they maintained so that they don't leak? Can you explain the lagoons?
I'm sorry, kind of hard to hear up here, so what did
The water, you said that there were wastewater lagoons.
Yes.
What, can you describe those a little bit better? How much do they hold? What do they hold? Are they lined? What keeps them from leaking? Any problems with those?
I'm not on the water side, but my understanding is they are part of the wastewater treatment process from the materials in the plant before it's cleaned up enough to be discharged to the Congaree River. Those have been lined. Some have been lined more recently than others. We are in the process right now of looking at a plan for what they call the East Lagoon to analyze that, and it's got a much older liner in it, and decide whether that's going to be just removed from service. And I'll let Mike's in charge of our, Dr. Marcus in charge of our water side, so he knows this.
Right. And this is, anything with the wastewater ponds is regulated under, it's called NPDES, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, and that is delegated authority under the Federal Clean Water Act. And so the NPDES permit, the discharge permit, has expired for this facility. That's neither here nor there, it's just a statement of fact. And what has happened is we have prepared the next permit that would, and NPDES permits operate on a 5-year cycle. So every 5 years they're reviewed and adjusted and renewed and whatever. So, make a long story short, within about 2 weeks probably, first week or so of August, you will be notified that the draft NPDES permit will be going on public notice, okay? And we're going to let you know that. It will be going on public notice at the same time as the draft air permit, and we did this on purpose so that you could be able to see both air and wastewater at the same time and not have one a month apart from each other, whatever. And that, to your question specifically, the draft NPDES permit will have the discussion in it about the different process flows that goes to the different lagoons, how they're treated, and eventually it's all combined. It's piped down to the Congaree River. There's a submerged diffuser in the river, and it's diffused into the river. So within, I'd say about 2 weeks, Rhonda, something like that, we're in early August, you will get notified that the draft NPDES permit is out there for your review, anyone's review, everyone's review, along with the draft air permit.
Thanks, Mike. Question here?
Yes, I wanted to ask, will they be going to the property, different properties and sampling the water?
So this is about question ID for Mike again about sampling of drinking water wells on private property. We're talking about sampling of drinking water wells on private property.
You talking about the sampling we did that Ken is representing?
Will they be coming around to different families' properties to test water, test the water, well water?
So will there be additional well water testing?
We don't have any plan now. However, if you feel the need or the uncertainty or whatever, please see me afterwards, okay? But this sampling that we did, the department did, that Ken showed on the map there, that came out, it was about a year ago, and that came out of 2 different public meetings, and we opened it up and said, if you want your well sampled, come see us. 14 people signed up, and we haven't had, and all those results are posted on the Westinghouse webpage, and they were good for everyone, all of us. The results were very favorable in terms of private drinking water supply. But if you want to talk more about additional sampling or whatever, please see me afterwards. I'll be happy to talk to you about it.
Hello? I wanted to ask a question about a recent accident that happened at Westinghouse. First of all, folks, I'm not sure who was notified about this accident that happened on July 12th, but I do know for a fact that Tom Clements monitored the nuclear regulatory site, found the accident, and contacted the media. Okay, so number one question is, I don't believe that the community is being notified about any accidents that occur at Westinghouse, because the media would not have known if Tom Clements didn't call the media, and therefore the community was not aware. At this accident, there was a so-called small fire with several ounces of uranium-235, a radioactive heavy metal, were in the container, the report says. The fire was found at 2 a.m. in the morning. The newspaper article from the state newspaper on July 15th goes on. Well, my question is, there weren't robots who found this fire. There were human beings. A human being had to walk by this fire that had uranium-235 burning. So my question is, common sense one, perhaps, most likely, a human might have inhaled uranium-235 into his or her lungs. So I'm just curious about what is DHEC or anyone else, Westinghouse, NRC, doing to monitor the safety of its employees? Has there been any medical ongoing investigation into these humans who found this fire, etc.? Okay, and then in the spiking station, we can see from that picture that concrete was poured. I was at a community meeting out in Hopkins, and also at many other meetings at the State Museum, and heard people first talk about the spike station leak, that uranium acid leak. They didn't know how long and how much had leaked below the surface. I just wonder about pouring concrete in there. what's below the concrete? I was told at one community meeting that, well, that's the end of that because we're reaching the water table is close to the end of this concrete. I just don't believe there's been any continued cleanup or investigation into that area. That's an alarming situation. So if you can please answer, how will the community be notified of these ongoing accidents that continue to happen at Westinghouse? And also there were other Lower Richland residents who signed in today, and they said they've never received, still to this day. I've been at countless meetings for years now with Representative Joe Neal, and we've been promised that there would be communication to the residents.
So
It hasn't happened.
I want to make sure we're capturing these questions because I heard a couple of different issues that were being raised there. One is about some of the recent events. Ken, you had spoken about the spiking station last summer, and then there's also about the recent one that was in July of this year. Westinghouse does have some representatives here. Did y'all have something you wanted to add to that? Y'all might be able to address that. And then we'll make sure we don't lose that concept of notification. That was the other big question that I heard in there. Is that capturing major issues there? And worker safety. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I heard notifications, how we're monitoring for worker safety. What do we do with digging out the dirt and monitoring with regards to the spiking station? And then I heard how we can continue to monitor. And so I'll go ahead and start answering those questions. And if I don't get all parts of it, please restate your question, okay? I'm Mike Anacon, I'm the plant manager of the Columbia Fuel Facility. So first off, regarding the notifications from the drum issue, do we have a picture of that? We don't have that. I thought we included that, okay. So with regards to the notifications from the drum issue, we made a number of notifications. First off, we have required regulatory notifications that are needed to be made in certain circumstances. This particular issue tripped the trigger for a regulatory notification. Basically, we had a situation where the drum containing uranium-bearing materials pressurized due to a chemical reaction that occurred in the drum, and the lid blew off of it, and then when the air came into the drum after the lid came off, some paper that was in the drum that was hot caught fire, okay? And that went out. So fairly promptly, I wish we had the picture. I thought we had that. I apologize. That went out by itself very promptly because there was not a lot of material that was engulfed in that issue. In fact, it was just a few pieces of paper. We were able, actually, after the event, to pull all the rest of the material out of that drum that was not involved in the issue. So there was very little material involved in the fire. It was just paper near the top. However, regardless, it shouldn't happen. That kind of problem should not happen. We're taking a lot of corrective actions. I can talk about that in a minute, but I want to finish answering your questions. We did notify the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as required for that issue. We also made a verbal notification to DHEC of the issue. Although there was not a regulatory required notification through the consent agreement and just the right thing to do to talk to them, we made sure DHEC knew what was going on. We also provided informational notifications to some of the local stakeholders. There were some local politicians that were notified. We also sent a written summary of the event and what happened to the co-chairs of the Lower Richland Community Advisory Committee, if you recall. After the meetings last fall that we had around the spiking station, we agreed that we would improve our communications with the local community, and what was established to drive those communications was that committee. We've met with that group at least 5 or 6 times since last fall. And in between meetings, if we have issues like the Sealand issue that occurred or the drum issue that you're referring to, we provide them a summary of what happened, opportunity for them to ask questions, and then in our next planned meeting, typically we'll go into some detail on those issues. So that was the avenue that we established. We also notified the chair of the Governor's Nuclear Advisory Committee of that issue, so they were made aware of the problem, and there were others that were notified, but you're asking more about the local area. Those are the kind of people that we notified. With respect to monitoring the issue in my plant, so we perform airborne monitoring. We took air samples in the area following that event. Unfortunately, well, again, the situation is not tolerable. We should not allow that to happen. Fortunately, it was not a major fire. There was just a couple of pieces of paper. So our surveys demonstrated that there was no significant impact or impact at all, actually, radiologically in the area. In general terms, my workers are monitored both for external dose and airborne radioactivity, and they're monitored for that through routine samples to verify that our controls are proper and that there's no impact to them. So we did not find any issues through our sampling that we took post that event. We will continue to monitor our employees through our normal practices, and we don't expect to see any problems from this issue based on the relative significance of it. With respect to the spiking station, as was shown in the picture that Ken had in the presentation, we removed the dirt below the spiking station and sampled the soil. So when you commented that concrete was put there, that was subsequent to digging the dirt out and removing the dirt and sampling the soil. We also monitor the groundwater around that area with the groundwater monitoring wells. We've provided all those results to DHEC for their review, and those wells indicate that there was no groundwater contamination. Subsequent to completing all our samples, DHEC reviewed all those results and agreed it was okay for us to refill with the concrete, and so we did that. And we continue to monitor that area. As Ken mentioned, if you recall, one of the slides that he showed had a picture of my plant, and it had a number of areas outlined, and we called them operable units. So as part of our consent agreement, we signed up with DHEC to make sure that on a go-forward basis, to ensure through continuous monitoring and some improvements that we continue to make, not only the wells that you see, the additional sampling, we've enhanced the tool that we use to monitor our groundwater. It's a 3D called Site Conceptual Model. We put that in place last fall. It's a very significant improvement on how we can monitor the groundwater at my plant. It's a much more predictive tool of how groundwater flows, and if you have a challenge, where it might go and when. That's really helping form the basis for our decision-making and DHEC's decision-making regarding our strategies for remediation in the future. So we put that in place, along with our remediation strategy document and through the consent agreement with the operable units. That ongoing monitoring will ensure that we don't have any problems that we may have missed from that spiking station problem. So that's
going back to the fire. So like you said several times, it's only a couple pieces of paper, but it's actually several ounces of uranium.
Yeah.
235. There were several ounces of uranium, 235, in that fire. It wasn't only a couple pieces of paper. At what time did you monitor the air quality next to, as close as you could, to that fire, because it occurred at 2 a.m. And then, how many people found the fire? Why was there a fire? Why does Westinghouse continue to have accidents?
Okay, so there was uranium in the drum, but the 74 grams of uranium that were in the drum were not consumed in the fire. That's a fact. The fact was paper at the top of the drum was involved, which contained very little to no uranium because it was paper at the top of the drum.
What
Okay.
time was the air monitored during that fire? What time? According to reports, the fire occurred at 2 a.m. What time was the air monitored by that fire?
I think maybe, Ed, if you can answer that, and I guess you're getting up to answer that, and then we want to make sure that we get to the folks who are waiting over here, so we'll come back to that if we need to.
Ma'am, I'm Ned Wills. I'm also from Westinghouse. I work for Mike in environmental health and safety. Our health physics staff has routine monitoring throughout the plant, and that's one of the areas that we have routine air monitoring. the area. So we had monitor sampling going in that area when the incident occurred. We also had people that are on shift 24 hours a day on our health physics staff. They're part of our response team that would respond to that. They responded, took additional samples in the area while the event was going on, and then none of those samples showed anything above any of our limits with respect to airborne for our personnel. In addition, the building exhaust for that area is filtered through a HEPA filtration system and also a scrubber unit. So, and we monitor, we sample the staff and count the sampling data for that, and we didn't see any impact from that as well.
Now, my last question is, if that fire actually had been a larger fire, at what point would the community be notified? And what are the steps for the community, the residents, to have been notified if that fire was larger and spreading to the outside or precisely the fire? At what point would the residents have been notified and how?
Sure. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So we have an emergency plan that is prepared, reviewed, and approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That emergency plan defines different types of events and relative significance of the events that would require us to respond in a different way and a lesser challenge. That procedure or that response, there's for a fire that would involve special nuclear material. I apologize, I don't have the exact criteria memorized, and we will be glad to provide that criteria to you. But basically, if we were to have a fire involving that type of material that would rise to the significance of tripping us entering our emergency plan, we would then immediately notify the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That has to be done within about 15 minutes of classifying that issue. Our emergency plan procedures also require us to make formal notifications to local emergency response organizations and local key decision makers. The county has emergency response organizations, and when we enter our emergency plan, those get activated. In fact, the NRC activates their emergency response facility, and it would be through those agencies. We provide the information to those agencies on what happened, its relative significance, the actions were taken, the data that we have, and then the local emergency response organizations and decision makers have the responsibility and the authority to make a decision on what protective actions may or may not be needed for the local public. So they work on that while we work on focusing on the issue at the plant and containing it to prevent it getting any worse or challenging the public. So that's how that division of responsibility occurs in a situation like that. And like I said, I apologize, I don't have that criteria memorized. We have a procedure for that, and we'll be glad to provide that information.
So, Donna, we do have several questions over here. I want to make sure Robert's been very patient waiting for this. And I know we've got some other questions right here, so I want to make sure we get some of these addressed.
Thanks. And this is somewhat of a follow-up to Elaine's concerns. But we just heard from Westinghouse just about how they responded to this latest issue. And I'd love to hear from Ken or someone from DHEC. And this is in regards to the consent agreement and some of the notifications that are part of that consent agreement. And if you could just expand on how this particular incident related to that consent agreement, that things work out the way that DHEC expected it to, and what did DHEC do as a result of this recent incident? That's the first part. And if there's someone from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission who would also be able to sort of share with us, just a few months ago we heard from them when they were here in Columbia, and I know that they were looking at some of the recent incidents that occurred at Westinghouse and how some of these latest things really impact some of the decision making that's coming down the pipe for them.
Yes, Robert, I'd be glad to, at least on the DHEC perspective. Although we were verbally notified, it was really a courtesy because the purview under the consent agreement is really anything that gets outside of the building. This is a process, it's in their internal process. That is really something that's governed by NRC's license, and NRC will let them speak to it. So the consent agreement really doesn't get inside the building per se. It's, if you have a release from
the lagoons or from maybe something gets under the building and then eventually gets the groundwater moves out. That's all going on now, and Mike mentioned that part of the work that's going on now, yeah, there's some groundwater wells outside the building near the spiking station, but one thing I failed to mention before is I showed you the groundwater flow directions, but groundwater moves very slow. I mean, even 100 feet a year, it's going to take you 3 years to get a football field away. And the existing wells that are there are probably 2 years away from being able to be detected. Now, when they dug up, as they're digging down through the spiking station, it was incremental. They were taking samples, and most of it was clean. They didn't see any uranium, but here and there they picked up a little bit. But by the time they got down about 9 feet, we really didn't see it anymore. So I can't say a drop or two didn't get down there, but a well outside today is not necessarily going to tell us anything for another year or two. Now, part of what they're doing now in the investigation is they're trying to get a ring of wells just outside the building. So if there is something there that we don't know about in the past, we hopefully could maybe detect it and then deal with it then. But right now, it's not the purview of the consent agreement to get into the operational sense, which all that NRC mentioned there earlier.
So we do have some NRC reps here.
Yeah, hi. My name is Tom Bukovinsky. I'm with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission out of the Region 2 Atlanta office, and we're inspectors. We come out to the facility quite often. You've probably seen me. I've been involved with these public meetings before. So to answer your question, so on the latest event, it occurred on a Friday. It's what we consider a 24-hour event, so the licensee has 24 hours to notify the NRC officially that something happened. They notified, it happened around 2 in the morning. They let the NRC know around 3 in the afternoon, roughly. I was called earlier than that. The licensee official contacted me. We had a discussion before the official notification went out. So we were well aware of the event. Speaking of some of the other events and our responses, so the 2 latest ones was a Sealand container that Ken talked about, and although that didn't rise to official NRC notification requirement, we had an inspection team that happened to be going out to the site, so we had one of our inspectors follow up and look into that also. And his write-up, his report will be coming out here at the end of this month. So we looked at it. We're going to include some of that in our inspection report. As far as this latest event, when we get an event notice in, the way our process works is we screen it for its significance, and that determines what we do with that. In this case, we went through all of our screening questions, and it resulted in no reactive inspection, meaning it didn't rise to a significance level where we needed to send an inspector out like that day, or a team out, the next day or whatever. However, knowing that I was coming to this public meeting, I took the opportunity to go to the facility this afternoon or this morning. I inspected the event, the corrective actions that Westinghouse has put in place so that this doesn't happen again, at least in the interim. They're still doing their investigation, so it's not complete yet. We're going to follow up later in September. But I'm confident in the procedure changes that they've made and talking to the operators and the training they had, that they've taken steps that this will not happen again. So that's some of our responses. I just want to add one more thing. Going back to your question earlier, from our last public meeting that we had at the State Museum, following the meeting, we got a list of community members that wanted to be informed of events or different things going on at the facility. So we got a list of emails. And I've been sending out periodic emails to that group to inform them what's going on. And so after this 55-gallon drum event, I did send out a blast email to that group letting them know about that. And part of that, one of the individuals on there works at the state newspaper. So the state newspaper was notified. You didn't get it? Talk to me afterwards, make sure. There was a couple that we couldn't read the handwriting so well. But if anyone else wants to be on that last email dial, just come see me after the meeting and I'll get your email and we can add you to it.
So there are a number of different ways to stay informed. The DHEC website that's up here, it does have a link to the NRC page as well within that. And we have where you can sign up to be notified when things through us as well. So, and even signing in tonight, we'll try to make sure we're helping keep people informed of the community.
Well, keeping people informed, put up a horn that if anything goes wrong, that an employee or a robot can press a button and everybody can hear within a 5 to 10 mile radius, we can be alerted. And then we can go on and find out what's going on. And also, do those employees wear radioactive badges to test their health?
So that employee question, I know, is beyond the scope of DHEC. That's a yes? Is there was also a question about a horn or some type of notification.
I think the question is, do we have a horn siren notification system? Do you see that at operating nuclear plants? The answer is no, we don't. By regulation, we don't have to have that system based on the relative risk of our facility as compared to an operating nuclear power plant. So that's why we don't have that. However, I think it's important based on the nature of the discussion that we establish channels like we've been working on to make sure the local community is informed. But no, we are not required to have a horn system.
So someone answer this one right here.
My question is this: when you all cleaned up the spiking station, where did the contaminated dirt go to? And number two is, why did we have all that stuff stored in those drums for all that time when we know the drums have a tendency to leak?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. So the dirt that was removed from the spiking station area, we have contracts and agreements with waste disposal facilities that are licensed to handle and store and disposition that kind of material. So that's where that soil went. In terms of the second part of your question, excuse me, can you repeat it again? Oh, the drums, yeah, that's a very good question, and that's a great comment, and I'm aligned with you on your concern. You know, we've had
EPA cleanup site across the street from Westinghouse.
Yes, ma'am.
With the same problem.
Yeah.
Storing chemicals over there in drums that leaked.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. It's a very good question, and again, I'm perfectly aligned with your question and your concern around the sea lands. We should not allow that condition to exist on my site. There were a number of issues that have occurred over the history of the plant that led to a situation where that material was built up, backed up, and stored until we could process it. We recognized that gap and started the process this year to get rid of it. And we can't tolerate keeping that. So we've built plans to urgently work to process that material off our site and eliminate that hazard. We've also made changes to, in the meantime, until we get it off our site, we've enhanced our inspection process. One of the things that we learned about our inspection process is that sea lands are rather large. They're about 40 feet long. It's hard to tell from the picture. It's like you see a large tractor trailer. There are a number of drums in there. And when you do, the way we were doing our visual inspections, you would open the front of it and you would look in, and what you would just see is you can only really see the front few drums, man. And you really couldn't see all the drums. And so we don't think that that was the right way to go about doing that. So we've now changed that process until, first off, we verified the integrity of all the sea lands that exist. And then we've changed we've looked in them with the best way we can. And then what we're doing is we're working now with our new inspection process to completely offload all the drums from inside that container and look in it to verify every drum has been looked at, that the whole floor is looked at, and there isn't a problem. So it's going to take us some time to process that material through our systems. You can join in, Ed, and help Ed. But we have changed our inspection methodology, so until they're completely removed from the site, we can assure ourselves that we don't have a problem. And I think what you're telling me is we've stopped putting anything out there. It's
No longer allowed.
no longer allowed. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We have a plan for basically what we've done, and this is being monitored by DHEC. So again, this part's linked to our consent agreement through the Southern Storage Area Operable Unit. We've categorized all the material in every sealant. We've looked at, based on what it is, what has the highest risk to be challenged to the environment. And we've prioritized the order by which we're going to process that material or remove it from our site based on risk. So we do have a curve that we monitor for how we're processing that material through our systems to recover the uranium. Some of those sealands we're working through the decision making just to remove it from our site and ship it to an appropriate waste storage facility so we can get it off my site sooner, and we're working through that decision making. But our intentions are to aggressively get that material off my site and remove that risk, because we should not allow that to continue. Yes, ma'am. It'll be part of the consent agreement. That will, as I think Ken mentioned, they have a website that will be keeping information up to date, and then we will continue to meet with the Lower Richland Community Advisory Committee. We've been very open with that group. We've provided them copies of all the information we've provided to DHEC. We've provided a copy of the consent agreement and went through it in conjunction with DHEC. We've also provided that committee with information we've provided to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission as part of our license renewal process and our environmental permit reapplication. So it's our intentions to keep that group informed of our progress and any challenges we have executing our plan. You're welcome.
Donna, we have a question over here from Deshaun.
Hey there. Earlier you all were talking about the well water testing and how only 14 people signed up. Is that what you were saying about what, ma'am? How many? You said that last year you all offered well water testing and only how many people signed up?
14.
14. That's an accurate statement, but you were saying that that's only people that signed up. However, what you did not tell this group was that only 15 bids for well water testing was sent out. So that's why only 15 wells got tested last year. I know for a fact that's what happened because I have the email and I'm the one that was in constant contact with the DHEC environmental guy. Then, on top of that, Richland County opened up, let me back up for a minute. And in those well water testings, 4 people in a certain area, not too far from Westinghouse, they were told that they needed to boil their water before using it for bathing or drinking or cooking because they found radon at a higher level than normal for their area. I didn't get that from DHEC, I got that from the people who were tested because they contacted me personally. Then, Richland County opened up, supposedly it was supposed to be 101 wells to be tested, but somehow or another, they shut that down. Can you explain that to us, please?
I can't speak anything about Richland County and their activities. I don't know. All I know from signed up with us, there were 2 public meetings last year. The first one that kicked everything off, and then the second. And both of those, the department made the offer, if you want your well tested, sign up before you leave the meeting. That's how we ended up with 14.
Available, wells available for the bid, and I know because I work with DHEC for that because I'm a part of the Lower Richland Advisory Committee.
Can you start over because I lost your? I'm sorry.
I was saying you said only 14 people signed up, and I said I kind of agree with that. When you all only bidded out 15 wells to be sampled, it was not that only 14 people signed up. When more people went to sign up, because I was trying to get people signed up, they were told no more than 15 could be tested. So now, go ahead,
I'm sorry, I'm not aware that happened. I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm not aware. We were ready to test as far as I'm concerned. We were ready to test as many wells as signed up, and we didn't have a magic limit number.
Then why did you all cut off the testing for people? Why did they say they reached their number and that they were not taking any more people for testing?
At some point, we had to say, we think we've got everyone that's interested has signed up. Well, I mean,
I can provide you with all the emails between DHEC and how I was trying to get more and more people signed up, and you all rejected those signings.
I would definitely like to talk to you about that because this is all news to me and that's not the way it was intended to go. So I definitely want to talk to you.
We'll make sure y'all talk after the meeting. Is that good?
Yeah,
Myra, you have something?
we definitely will test anyone's well if they want it tested. So, I don't know, was that communication with Michael Bailey by any chance?
You and I spoke as well.
Okay, all right. But we may have been limited from as far as procurement for that set, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stop testing. So.
You and I talked, you told me there were only 2 sets of rounds of testing that was going to be done for 15 wells total. That's what you told me after. I said, Michael, that didn't make sense. And he put me in contact with you, and you and I had that same conversation. So are you all going to charge the people now if they want their wells tested?
No, we're going to offer again, anyone that wants their well tested at this meeting, please let us know, okay?
So everybody please sign up. If you're concerned about your water, go ahead and get signed up because they're going to pay for it. And you might as well take it because this test is what, $210 each or something like that?
It depends on the constituents that you're testing for. So we will definitely, Christy, I guess maybe y'all have at the table a sign up and people, we need to make sure that we're signing up people if they have concerns about their private wells and also notifications. One thing I was thinking about, Keisha, is we might do a survey of the attendees to figure out the best ways and multiple ways that we can keep you informed of what's going on with the investigation and as we get additional information.
Are you talking, just for clarification, Myra, are you talking about an electronic survey that they can expect maybe that's going out? Okay.
What about the people who you do not have electronic mail to get electronic surveys? Do you think that electronic would be the best way to go if everyone is not electronic savvy?
No, what we're saying is that we could use that as one of our ways of getting in touch with you all, but certainly our whole community engagement team is here. We'll be glad to talk to anybody, make sure that you get on any list before you leave here.
And also, we do have paper surveys at the tables outside, so please, you can write information. I believe when y'all were coming in tonight, you had a sign-in option that did have email, but maybe did have some other methods of contact. So having that information helps us as an agency as well.
Just a point of the paper, the phone number at the bottom, that actually is my office number.
Okay. So in the bottom of the agenda, that phone number will ring to Keisha's.
Okay. First of all, I have a comment. When the gentleman across the room said that there was a system whereby a horn could be sounded that would cover a 10-mile radius to alert the people in the vicinity of Westinghouse, that was one way of sending out the information. And the Westinghouse person said that wasn't required of him. Sometimes what we do, the things we do, goes beyond and above what's required. If it's in the best interest of the people in the community, and Westinghouse is truly a good neighbor of ours, I think they could go a bit further and do a bit more than what's required of them. But my question is, that soil that was taken out of that spiking station that was contaminated, you said it was a contract that was given to a company to remove that soil and dispose of it. Is there any way we know where that soil went? Did that soil go down to the Savannah River plant, or did that person take a shortcut and dump that soil 5 miles down the road in my neighborhood?
So yes, ma'am, that's easily retainable, and what we were required to do by DHEC is to provide the waste manifest as to where it went. I can't remember if it went either to the radioactive waste disposal site in Clive, Utah, or in Texas. I believe it was in Clive, Utah, because Clive, Utah, to a licensed low-level radioactive waste burial site. And DHEC required us as proof of that to show manifest of where the dirt went. So we owe them, I just don't know if we sent the final manifest or we're in the process, but we're required to do that as part of the remediation that we did in that area. So it's in Utah.
So just to clarify, manifest.
Let me clarify, the manifest just means that there's paperwork saying it's going somewhere, who picks it up, and when it's delivered. So it can't end on the side of the road. It's a regulated carrier, and it's going to a licensed facility specifically handle that kind of material.
Good evening. Okay, so I want to talk about inspections. The NRC representative, I'd like to talk to you, please. Mike, you just mentioned the sealand containers, and you guys are doing a better job on inspecting them. I think what I probably heard you say was that we just peek in and go. Everything looked fine. NRC, December 2018 inspection report. Should Westinghouse in that class go from an annual inspection to a tri-annual inspection? And if so, is there some kind of way you can go back to Westinghouse can't be included in that? We need to inspect them a little more, given what's going on. You inspected in December, you missed that. 6 months later, you got a hole in a sealand container. Explain, please.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know specifically what the word said in the December report. Generally, we look at it from different aspects. If the licensee is conducting an inspection when the doors are open and our inspectors are on site, we will potentially watch them do their inspection. Likely, that didn't happen at the time.
This is an NRC inspection.
That's right.
Do it inspection.
That's right, an NRC inspection. So what likely was, what they were inspecting was that the sealand containers were properly marked as radiological postings, and that they had their seals on them for material control and accountability. Because everything that's in there is controlled. Every drum, they know how much uranium is in each drum, and they have to control and account for all that material. And our inspectors are always following that. So that is likely what they're inspecting. So chances are that they didn't look inside. The doors weren't open when they went out to do the inspection. The second part of your question is concerning there's an initiative going on with the NRC right now it's called a Smarter Inspection Program, and that's the meeting that you listened to a couple weeks ago. That initiative is looking at all the fuel facilities and making some proposed changes on how inspections are done. So nothing's finalized yet. What the meeting you heard is what the licensees were proposing through the Nuclear Energy Institute, NEI. They're proposing, make changes in this area, make changes in this area, depending on what category fuel facility you're at. Westinghouse is considered a category 3. The high enriched facilities are category 1. So they're a little different, but that's ongoing. And there is another public meeting coming up on the 8th of August, and this discussion will continue, and I can give you all that information.
So is Westinghouse that class in this change from annual to?
Well, that has not been finalized, to go from annual to every 3 years or 4 years. But yes, Westinghouse would be included in those changes, if that makes sense.
Well, no, it doesn't make sense, but okay, I got it.
Yeah, that's what the industry is proposing, some changes. So, but nothing's been finalized yet. So. Okay, but I can give you all that information about the next public meeting.
People, the only way they're going to understand is that you guys are on those calls and you make it be known. We cannot afford for Westinghouse to go from being inspected by NRC once a year to every 3 years. They missed a big old hole that was getting ready to start that 6 months after their inspection report happened. That's metal, y'all. How you get a big old hole in a metal container?
The public, this meeting that's coming up to talk about this inspection program is open to the public. It's a category 3 meeting that the public is welcome to add stuff to the agenda. The meeting is physically going to be located in Atlanta, Georgia. But there's going to be a teleconference. There's going to be a phone. Anyone can call in. Anyone can ask questions. Anyone can bring up any concerns. And we highly encourage you to do that because there hasn't been a lot of public interaction to this point.
So that meeting is on August 8th. Is that a Thursday? Maybe?
If somebody doesn't know, yeah, it's August 8th.
So it's going to be on August 8th, and it's going to be available by phone, so we'll
That's right.
make sure
So-
people are able to connect to that information.
Yeah, see me after the meeting. I'll make sure that I get your email and I'll send you the meeting invite or the meeting notice.
I think we can also put that on our webpage.
That's correct. Yeah, Thursday.
Hi, and I believe you addressed some of my concerns. And what I've been hearing this entire meeting is everything related to litigation. Things are being done to correct problems that have already happened. What I am concerned about is your quality processes and what is going to be changed, just like you mentioned a minute ago, to fix issues before they happen. I know some of your processes are human, some of your processes are computerized. Are those processes going to be looked at as a whole? Computer programs, just like everything else, need to be tweaked, they need to be adjusted. Are the containers, do they have sensors that will tell you, if you know there's 100 pounds of uranium in that container, and there's a sensor that tells you that that container should be 1,000 pounds, it should not take for someone to go inside to look and say, oh yeah, you're 5 pounds down, and now we have an issue. And that's the kind of information that I think should also be put as a part of your communication. I don't necessarily, I'd like to know when there's an issue, but I would like to know what is being done to make changes to combat anything that could possibly happen. Because these are things that can cause health issues. These are things that cause death. This is not like I'm going to put a new tire on my car.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question and comment. I'd like to start by going back to add a little bit to Ms. Irick's question, okay, to the NRC. And I appreciate the questions and challenge to them about your role and what they have to do. But I want to start first and foremost with me and my plant, my organization. It's our job to prevent these problems, to find and fix these problems on our own, and to put corrective actions in place to change our processes, our program, our training, all those things, so events like that don't happen again. Okay? So what the NRC counts on us, just like what you count on for us, is for us to find our problems, to fix them the right way, to communicate what we're doing about it so that you have confidence that we will find problems. And then what you really want to know, which is a very good question, is great, you found this problem, you fixed this, but what are you doing to prevent more problems, right? That's really what you're after. And that's what our role is. So what we're obligated to do, and what we do is the focus that we have, is to make sure that when we have a problem like this, we don't just take care of the issue, but we do an investigation that goes down into why did this problem happen? What was it about our procedures? What was it about our training program? What is it about our equipment? What is it about our standards? What is it about the way we're investing technology in our facility that has allowed this problem to occur? Especially if it's a problem that's been allowed to occur over a period of time. And then what we have to do then is go put those fixes in place and change that, and change the experience of my people to say this is something that we can't tolerate in the future as we go forward. We also do what are called extended condition reviews, so that when we have a problem like this, we don't just fix that one thing, we look at how that condition could apply across the whole facility or in like type scenarios. So we are doing that work now to make sure that we're applying those kind of fixes to shift the culture of what we've tolerated in the past so that we don't have these kinds of problems into the future. So that's what we're focused on. And I don't know if you wanted to add anything about how we monitor the COMs.
I think, from our perspective, one of the reasons that we wanted to enter into the consent agreement with DHEC, and it's an agreement, and there's two parts to that. What's in it for us is we knew that we needed to be looking comprehensively at our fixes. And I think Ken talked earlier tonight about doing things one at a time. consent agreement for us is an example of us looking very broadly at all of the issues with respect to environmental and making sure that we correct those things and find the sources and find the things that are the fundamental root causes for that and put the actions in place so that they don't occur.
So, I want to take this opportunity, to thank DHEC. I know that we've had an opportunity to work with Keisha and with Ken, and this is with the NAACP, I want to first say that. And I know that there have been a lot of people in this community that have been stalwarts, just making sure that they've been vigilant, keeping their sort of finger on the pulse. I know Ms. Arick and Ms. Williams, Ms. Kirkland, I know you all have been doing it. I just want to say that the NAACP is going to be vigilant with you. And we've been trying to make sure that we've been at all these community meetings, that we've been working collaboratively with DHEC, but it takes a citizen coalition. It takes us being vigilant and staying on top of this too, so that then we can create the channels of communication that would disseminate this information to the broader Lower Richland community. We invite you to work with us. We invite you to work with us so that it's not somebody else's responsibility. And I've been at these meetings for the last 5 or 6 months, and I've seen the same individuals asking vigilantly the same questions, and I know that it gets tiring for those individuals having to keep up this fight. I'm inviting others to be a part of the environmental committee that really is disseminating this information to the community so that we can then work collaboratively with DHEC, with Westinghouse, to make sure that we are having our community in the best shape it can be in. So if you're interested, if you're willing, if you're ready to work, if you're ready to be vigilant, please help us with the NAACP. I'm just inviting you to be a part. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that comment and for stressing the importance of that, because that is on my priority list as well. We appreciate your involvement.
Mike, I have a question for you. Mike, got a question. Over here. Hey, Mike. Question. Has Westinghouse given any more thought process into the clean water initiative that we first discussed with you all sometime earlier this year? The Clean Water Initiative. Remember when we were at a meeting some months ago, we were asking, and you guys said you were more concerned about the community and the environment, and we were asking for the clean water, like the, I can't remember what the thing is called, that holds all the water, the water tower. Have you guys, you told me you were gonna get back to me on that. Have you guys put any more thought into that for us?
I'm gonna have to talk to you afterwards, Deshandra. Are you talking about installing a water tower?
We talked about at the, that's what I'm talking about at the State Museum and, at the church that night.
Okay.
You said you were gonna get back to me, you said you guys had to talk about it. Have you guys put any more thought process into that for us?
For installing a water tower for the community.
For Hopkins, yeah.
No ma'am, so I'll follow up with you offline after this, okay? I'll come see you right when we're done. Yep.
We have a question over here, Tom.
Yes, my question is for NRC and their inspection criteria. Can you please go over your visual and physical inspection criteria for those sealant containers? Because I'm trying to understand how you come out once a year and are you physically looking at everything? Because my understanding, those containers are in those sealants where you cannot actually look at everyone. So how can you sign off and say that you physically inspect the containers? You can't see top to bottom.
Yeah, no, ma'am. So the way our sampling works for the conducting inspections, so we have multiple areas we look at in the facility. We look at operations, we look at fire, we look at environmental, and as part of that, there's limited amount of.
I understand random sampling, that's what you're talking about. Or at any time, you're doing 100% sampling of these containers,
I'm talking about a hazardous waste site, because that's what you have out there, it's a hazardous waste site. And there should be at least annually 100% inventory and physical inventory of these containers to ensure that there is no breakdown or any leakage in those containers.
Unfortunately, we don't do 100% physical sampling of anything at the facility. That's just not the way our inspection program is established. We don't have the manpower or the hours to do that. Even at our facilities that have a resident that's there full time, he still does a sampling of different areas. So I get in an ideal real world where everything was perfect, yeah, we would go out and we would inspect everything on that site, but it's just reality, that's not what happens.
I've been in the real world where I had to inspect everything on my site. So yes, there is a real world where that does happen. It just doesn't happen for y'all.
I'm sorry.
I think it was expressing, say this is not the procedure that y'all use, to look at all.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, is you saying that in the real world, that this doesn't happen? It does happen in the real world.
Well, for the way our inspection program is established, we do not do 100% sampling of everything. And that's all I can tell you is that when we go out to the site, we'll pick a specific area, because we're only going to be at the site for like 3.5, 4 days. And we don't have so much time to look at so much stuff. So we'll pick a certain area and we'll look at that in specific. If the sea lands happen to be picked, maybe we'll look at that more closely, but it's a big facility, there's a lot of things to look at, and we do a sampling.
And that's across the country. Not just this facility, but all the facilities across the country.
That's correct.
Is it because you're low in staff? You don't have enough inspectors? These are important facilities across this country that affect communities, particularly African American communities or
I
rural
totally agree
communities.
with you. It's just our
That's
established.
just asinine to say that you cannot inspect. I understand 100%, but you just gave an excuse. We can only peep in. That's as far as we can go. Basically, is what you're telling us that live around this stuff.
It depends on the situation, the system, what we're expecting at the time, whether or not we're testing it at the time. Like I said, if we're on site, that environmental inspection only happens one time a year.
Yeah.
So if we're happen to be on site where we're going to open up the sea lands and conduct our inspection, we would likely be involved with that inspection. But for those to line up, it's pretty rare.
So, is this something where the consent agreement? This whole issues.
No, the consent agreement really, again, is things that get out into the environment. Is not to deal with waste management practices by regulatory design, be it DHEC or not. We have different parts of DHEC that do inspections for hazardous waste generators, for solid waste landfills. I mean, we do those kind of inspections, but the consent agreement really is dealing with anything that's gotten out of where it's supposed to be and make sure we're monitoring where it is and clean it up. It's not speaking toward how you properly manage your materials.
Yes, my question is from an environmental standpoint. And you said you have a lot of sea lions stored out at the site. So what are the environmental rules and regulations as to how long you can actually store that waste on site before it's disposed?
Again, up until now, those sea lands have been treated, I believe, by Westinghouse and NRC as product. It's recoverable uranium that they're waiting to process it and recover the uranium out of it. They are totally contained. Obviously, we had a problem with one, but it's not something that DHEC has been involved before in looking at as a waste. And I agree, it's materials that otherwise you'd probably call waste, but it's because of the uranium content that they're trying to get back out.
I have a question that follows up with the pond that you have out there. You said in your slide that nitrites, fluoride, ammonium, solvents, technetium-99, are they in higher concentrations than the uranium, or should we be more concerned about those substances? And is Westinghouse in a floodplain such that if those lagoons were to flood, what would that do to the surface water? And do you have those ponds there to monitor fish kills? Would that tell you that there's something in the water if there's a bunch of fish that died in your gator pond and all of that?
Well, the gator pond was the first incident that we knew about out there as an agency that something was going on in the environment and the groundwater. That gator pond is separate from the Mill Creek. It sits up higher, and it was getting groundwater from the wastewater lagoons that were leaching stuff out and getting into springs that fed into that gator pond. What I understand is in 1982, this is before I was here, but they determined the nitrates is probably what killed the fish. Nitrates are a big part of the operation there, as is fluoride. So there is a lot of fluoride at the site and a lot of nitrates, and they definitely got into the groundwater.
The solvents and the technetium 99, do we need to be as concerned about those substances as we are about the uranium-234?
Where the groundwater is and where it's going and where it's contaminated is very tightly constrained between the plant and those two lakes.
Is
That
Westinghouse
river.
a
But
floodplain?
they are each individual. There's only a couple wells that have actually found this thing over any kind of regulatory standard. They're in the process now of trying to find a source and make sure that source is taken care of, and if it needs to be, the groundwater needs to be dealt with beyond that, that's going to come out of this investigation and the study. But again, it's very constrained right there on the site between the plant building and those ponds. That's the only place that is found in groundwater anywhere near there.
Is Westinghouse in a floodplain? Is it a floodplain?
And this question's come up before. We did, I think at our lower Richland advisory committee meeting, it came up, and we went back and Westinghouse did too. In the big flood of 14, 15, 16? 15, thank you. Seems like yesterday, but there's actually, if you ever go to Google Earth, they have a time series of photos and you can see exactly where the floodwaters of the Congaree came, and they definitely flooded lower and upper Sunset Lake, but they did not get up as high as where that gator pond is, nor did it get up on site where the wastewater lagoons. Now, the wastewater lagoons filled up with a lot more water because of all that rain we had. It came straight on. So they filled up, and then that was an issue, but the floodwaters of the Congaree never got up onto that site.
Christy, I think there was a question right here, and then we'll get right here.
She's been holding her hand up forever.
Go ahead, Donna.
No, I didn't. I definitely didn't.
My next question is this. On the status of the NRC licensing, have Westinghouse been approved for the continuation of a license until the plant closes in what, 30, 40 years? Well, my question is really this. What's the status of the license?
I think that's a question that NRC could help us with.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Diaz. I'm from the NRC. I'm from headquarters, Rockville, Maryland. I'm in the new Office of Nuclear Material Safety and Safeguards, and we handle the licensing of Westinghouse. So right now, they are licensed to operate until 2027, is what I believe. We're conducting a license renewal review that will allow them to operate for a maximum of 40 years. But we're right now conducting that evaluation, whether 40-year is adequate or whether the safety programs are adequate for that time period.
Because I read in the newspaper where they said that there was a time that the plant was going to close. Is there a timeline for that?
Is there a time where the plant will close?
Cleanup process.
So as part of the review, so there are two things. As part of the renewal review, we look at decommissioning. One of the safety chapters are decommissioning. And so that entails that we look at how they plan in 40 years or in the time period that the license is issued, how would they go about decommissioning the site. The other process that we have is they have to update their triennially they have to update the decommissioning funding plan, and that just provides the financial instruments for when that time comes to decommission the site, there will be money available for that.
So then would it be a cleanup, would it be like a super fund cleanup, or what? What's gonna happen to that site once they decommission?
So once they decommission, it's all through the decommissioning safety chapter. So one of the things, the DFP, the decommissioning funding plan, is there to provide the sufficient financial instruments to provide decommissioning. So Westinghouse, if they close tomorrow, they just can't walk away and leave the site without a cleanup. So that piece, that tool, that financial tool, will allow them to decommission, to clean up, and properly decommission the site. Did I answer your question?
Through the consent agreement, though, that there's also the possibility as we find things today that we get them cleaned up now and not waiting for decommissioning. So that's something we definitely are looking at. If there's the right thing to do is let's get this stuff out now, not wait till you close in 40 years and then figure it out. If it makes sense to get it out now, that's what we're going to be encouraging.
Hey, I just want to make sure that I understand a few things. The first is that the consent agreement with DHEC doesn't, is it me? Require notification from Westinghouse to DHEC. Is that under all circumstances or just what's considered minor circumstances? My other question, so that I'm clear, is that the stakeholders in this room rely on Westinghouse's testing, especially in regard to their facilities, and Westinghouse's testing and analysis of leaks and things that are fires, et cetera, all of these accidents that we've seen so many times. And 3, what in the world is an appropriate storage facility for this material?
On site or
Anywhere in the world. I think it's crazy that we even have that idea.
I won't speak to it, but there are licensed low-level nuclear disposal facilities, licensed by NRC, to take low-level waste and encapsulate it forever. It's a long time. I'll say for the consent agreement, the notification piece is more guaranteeing that if something new occurs, they found a drum outside that's leaking, that they're going to let us know quickly and what the procedures are going forward to deal with it.
That is a requirement from the consent agreement?
That is part of the protocol. We're saying we're still negotiating that as part of the requirement of the consent agreement is to come up with that protocol.
Okay.
So we're in the process of getting that done. And the middle question? Oh, and
that we're relying on the, right.
Although Westinghouse does do some in-house sampling, there are a lot of the groundwater sampling and some of the other sampling is done by private third-party laboratories that are certified by DHEC to do those analyses. So it's not all done in-house by, Westinghouse is paying for it, it's their contractors, they hire a lab to do it.
Okay.
We oversee that, but DHEC also certifies those laboratories as a separate function of DHEC's authority.
Thank you.
Do we have any additional questions or comments that we want to touch on tonight? I know we've had some really good discussion. I've heard a couple of things that I know we want to follow up on before people leave tonight. And we can, if anyone wants to talk to us again about that product, sampling, I think Mike said it would be available at the back, and we can follow up with that. I also heard some follow-up steps of people who want to take part in that August 8th NRC meeting. We can certainly make sure we're providing information about that through the website, and we'll try to follow up with that information. And we're going to try to continue to share information as an agency going forward. Are there some other follow-up steps that we have coming from this meeting that y'all heard? There were some other ongoing discussions that we just want to have some clarification on. I really want to just say thank you to everyone for being here tonight. I think this was a really useful discussion for all of us, and I know that we are going to continue to have our commitment as DHEC to working with this community, working with this consent agreement, working with Westinghouse and all the stakeholders. If you look at that agenda tonight, when you came in, it talks about the stakeholders, and the stakeholders are everyone in this room. It's not just DHEC, it's Westinghouse, it's NRC, and it's the community as well. And so I really appreciate everyone being part of this discussion tonight. Are there any other closing comments that anyone would like to share? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, and please